Welcome to camp, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another discussion that is part of our exhibition, Connected City. This is actually, for me, it's beginning of the next season of camp. So it's one of the first lectures that we have in this season. But tomorrow is the last event from the summer program, so it's difficult. It's great. We love trains. We have exhibition focused on rails and trains and trams and metros and everything. We talked about almost everything that is gonna traveling around the world on rails. But we missed the high-speed trains, and we missed the system of high-speed trains, and we didn't talk about traveling behind the borders. And that's what we are gonna talk about today. You will see the presentation focused on design of the stations, about the United Stations of Europe, and after that there will be also a discussion with very interesting guests, and I'm looking forward to see your questions. So I will be really happy if you will be part of the discussion. You can join the discussion via Slido, which is the platform that we use to share the questions that you would like to ask. You will see there is a QR code behind, yeah, there, slido.com. You can scan it or you can type it into the browser. And if you will use the hashtag Camp Praha, you can join the discussion and you can ask questions, and we will answer them during the discussion, of course. The lecture is held in English, but if you would like to see the translation, we have interpreters here, so you can borrow the headset and you will hear the discussion translated into Czech. So if you will be more comfortable with that, definitely do it, and you'll be even able to ask questions. After that, we will be really happy to translate them, or you can use the Slido, and it will be maybe more accessible for you if you would like to use it. So let's begin. The first, I would like to introduce you, engineer and architect and CEO of Arep Group, Raphaël Menard, and he will tell us more about what he do and what his studio do. And we will see beautiful pictures of TGV that you might find out interesting when you've been browsing internet and you've seen that there is something cool happening about trains, and you've seen design of the interiors of the trains that you've never seen here in Czech Republic, but you'll be able to see them when you will traveling around the France, and even about traveling around the France will be one of the topics today. So Raphaël, I would like to ask you to join us, and we are looking forward to see your presentation, and after that we will start the discussion. So welcome to camp.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes, yes, okay. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great joy to be with you tonight in Prague, one of the brightest stars in the constellation of European cities, in a country that look to the future, to Europe, and to rail mobility. We'll discuss of that with colleague in half an hour. I'm the CEO of this multidisciplinary design consultancy, which is called Arep. This is a subsidiary of and a privileged partner of France's historic rail operator, SNCF, and which operate also, as pronounced, the TGV, right? Arep works on projects at every scale of mobility and territory, with a team of more than 1,000 talents, architects, urban planners, engineers, designers, data scientists, and expertise, flow expert also. As mentioned, for those of you who have traveled by rail in France, the chances are that you will have passed through stations we have designed, rested on furniture we have created, and followed signage we have designed. Starting next year, you should be able to ride on trains whose interiors we have conceived, like the new generation of TGV. And if you were to visit us in Paris, you could also find shade and rest beneath the new canopy we have designed for the city's public spaces. You will also find us in China, where we have designed 25 stations for the arrival of the high-speed rail. And soon, here in Czechia, we are designing the new Jihlava station with our partners on the high-speed line that will connect Prague to Brno. I'm an architect, and at heart, I'm very much a European, so this is my love letter. And these two callings clearly took shape in history. It was in the 1990s when our continent transformed at great speed, uniting under the banner of peace, democracy, and social progress. At the same time, European geography was evolving. I could see this in those maps that seems to redraw themselves before my eyes as the Iron Curtain fell. I discovered Europe and its capital by train. Prague, and it was in 1993. It was also many night trains connecting Paris to Budapest, to Berlin, to Madrid, to Rome, to Barcelona, Venice, etc. Today, as the temptation to turn inward grows in many European countries, I would like to share with you an enthusiasm. That of United Europe of Station, linked together by rails, by dreams, and by projects. Of all the continents, Europe is perhaps the one most shaped by the railway. Here is a snapshot of the world's railways in the global. It's 1 million kilometers in total. As you may notice on the picture, there are 5 distinct rail spaces which emerge clearly. Japan, China, as I mentioned, this is the mecca for high-speed lines. There's more than 40,000 kilometers of tracks. India and the eastern half of the United States. But none has the span and density of the European network, the most extensive continuous rail system in the world. The European network comprises 230,000 kilometers of tracks. Each European travels, on average, more than 1,000 kilometers by train per year with a very low carbon footprint. Of course, this is still very little compared to the 10,000 kilometers traveled annually by road. And so, shifting the modal share from road to rail or plane to rail is one of the obvious keys to decarbonizing the transport, which account for 30% of the continent's green gas emission. The design and urban integration of the 3,000 European stations share several common features. First, proximity and connection to the city center. Few major capitals or metropolitan areas in Europe have their main station located far from their center. History has anchor stations in the heart of the urban fabric, within walking distance of administrative, commercial, and cultural hubs. And when they were originally built on their outskirts, they were soon enveloped by the metropolitan growth. This ensured not only optimal accessibility, but also a natural integration into the daily life. Second, European stations engage in a dialogue with squares, boulevards, and open forecourts. These spaces are not merely functional. They are conceived as meeting places and hubs of civic life, as antechamber and reflection of our cities. From the monumental facade of Antwerp Central or Paris Gare du Nord, to the Way Parisian station aligning with major thoroughfare, to Milano Central reflecting the city's economic and political stature, or Madrid Atocha transformation of its historic train shed into a covered public space at the city heart. This station regularly seated amongst the world's most beautiful. This urban and architectural specificity of the European station becomes even clearer when we take a step back. AREP has designed 25 stations in China. We are proud of this vast machine for channeling the people flows of very high-speed rail, but here they are more keen to measure airport terminal. Often seated on metropolitan peripheries, this new station priorities functionality, efficiency, and passenger flow segregation over the civic and urban roles fulfilled by European stations. Some stations in Europe are handling annual flows greater than those of the largest museum of airports. In 3 days, Paris Gare du Nord, for example, welcomes the equivalent of the city's entire population and nearly 250 million passengers a year. To give a comparison, the Museum of the Louvre, this is 8 million people per year. They stay longer than in Paris Gare du Nord. In total, according to the International Union of Railways, European stations handled nearly 9 billion passenger journeys per year, 20 times the continent's population. It means that in just 2 weeks, the 30,000 stations across the entire network see traffic equal to all the inhabitants of Europe. These regular and massive flows form a shared culture, that of a continent where rail travel is a daily habit and where stations are more than infrastructure. They are places of memories, of encounters, and of the future. In European stations, I see the mirror of Europe itself, a network of cities linked by a continuous thread of rails, united by a shared urban destiny, and driven by a common goal, that of post-carbon future. So, now, a brief history of European stations. So, forward, I'm not a historian, but I would like to share with you a few reference points that, in my view, eloquently illustrate the historic role of rail in modern Europe history, and the way the train embodies Europe's energy trajectory over the past 2 centuries. We are celebrating the bicentenary of railways this year in Europe. It was last year for Great Britain, I remember so far. That's right, John. It is both the product and the accelerator of the Industrial Revolution, that of coal and steel. Brilliant inventors made this revolution possible. James Watt, ushered in the industrial application of Denis Papin and Newcomen's invention. Their portraits still adorn the doors of the former departure concourse at Paris Gare du Nord. Then Stephenson and his successor invented the modern railway. By 1835, speeds of 100 km per hour had already been reached. The first rudimentary embarkation sheds appeared in 1825 in Great Britain, and railway architecture began to emerge as early as 1830 in Manchester. In France, Versailles Rive Droite. Versailles has the particularity to have plenty railway stations. There are 5, but the oldest, this is Versailles Rive Droite, dating from 1839, is probably the one that has been preserved its original exterior architecture. The railway clearly embodied the new shock partnership of coal and steel that has powered the Industrial Revolution era, accelerating the extraction and transport of materials, coal, iron, fertilizer, and so on. It's what we call sometimes Anthropocene. Rail took firm hold in the second half of the 19th century. Europe already had 51,800 kilometers of tracks by 1860. This is one quarter of today's network. On the eve of the First World War, rail had reached an apex in Europe. 390,000 kilometers of tracks. Remember, this is 230,000 kilometers today. This was the era that saw the construction of the central station of Europe's large cities, monumental industrial cathedrals that still stand at the heart of urban life today. In 1860, Paris already had 6 major terminus stations. In most European countries, rail became a tool for territorial planning and national unification. Meanwhile, as stations serving smaller towns and villages outside of the big metropole, a type of standardized modular architecture was developed by railway companies using an industrial approach. At the time also, wars also put railway stations to the test. Stations became hospitals, logistics departure points for the military front, and sometimes for trains of death. Today, they still carry within them this memory. Albert Herter's painting, The Departure of the Poilu, Le Départ des Poilus, which hangs in the main hall of Gare de l'Est, moves me deeply. It commemorates the artist's son, killed in action, flanked by his grieving parents. Stations were also a staging post for convoys of deportees, as well as the return of prisoners and the wounded. Above all, they are memorial sites of Europe's collective tragedies. The train and the station contain many other heralds of the great mobility acceleration. They made speed accessible, large-scale travel possible. They are objects of fascination, inspiring the impressionists as well as cinema. Some of the most famous films by the French pioneers and the Lumière brothers show trains in motion here in the southern part of France. Futurism, of course, that school of movement, also reference it. The contemporary station. Born of the extravist era, both the railway and its stations must now face the Anthropocene and the challenge of climate change. The data curves that describe the great acceleration of the modern world post-World War II overlap almost perfectly with those of the energy consumption. An increase by a factor of 20 in just 2 centuries, and also a shift from renewables to 80% of fossil fuels. Railways and the station are heirs to this extractivist era in which infrastructure imprints its mark upon landscape and soils, just as surely as upon the upward curve of global temperature. At AREP, we are acutely aware of this heavy legacy, but we are equally aware of the transformative power of the train to decarbonize transport and usher in the post-carbon era. This is why we evaluate each of our projects through 5 key indicators that define their environmental footprint or impact. We call it EMC2B for energy, materials, carbon, climate, and biodiversity. This ecological framework pushes us to seek the optimal solution, the lightest possible footprint for every design function. And it plays a crucial role in making good on the promise of real decarbonization. The first question to ask when designing a station, the one that dictates its location and scale, is that of the intensity of its use and flows. Historic stations located in the heart of dense urban fabric maximize pedestrian accessibility, visibility, and daily utility. Peripheral stations make sense when placed at the point of convergence for several modes of transport, preferably low-carbon ones, such as trains, trams, intercity buses, and cycle routes, and when they promote smooth intermodality. The vast host of historic stations inherited from the industrial era offer today generous volumes adaptable to new uses, culture, co-working, event, etc., while retaining their transit function. For new projects, now built almost exclusively on new high-speed lines, the goal is to size with precision. Avoid costly spatial excess, expensive to build, to heat, to cool and maintain. Instead, favor a more compact, efficient architecture with clear passenger flows. Integrate from the design stage spaces that are shared and reversible. The Jihlava station is a case in point, a simple, restrained building, well located, a distillation of minimal expression that blends into the landscape while maximizing connectivity with Vysocina's region public transit and road. In France, increasing the frequency of regional trains to offer a genuine alternative to the car has gone hand in hand with reconfiguring stations into multimodal hubs, concentrating in one place several modes of travel: public transport, cars, bicycle, walking, and trains. In 2024, we created the largest bicycle parking facility in the Paris region at Gare du Nord, 1,200 spaces, but it's still far behind the European record in the Utrecht station with more than 12,000 spaces. So now, looking at energy, French station consumes 300 gigawatt hour per year, of which there is 2/3 of electricity. That makes roughly a passenger touch or a consumption per passenger equivalent to 100 watt hour, so which is obviously tiny, but which we have to also to reduce. And thus, to reduce its consumption, targeted action can be taken on specific functions such as lighting, as well as adopting bioclimatic design that limits or eliminates the need for heating, ventilation, and sometimes air conditioning. A fraction of the vast roof and land surfaces of stations can also be equipped with solar panels. By covering just 10% of the 10 million square meters of the French station area, their electricity production could match their total consumption. From the pioneering large-scale solar roof of Rotterdam, Berlin, and Turin Porta Sousa, designed by AREP in 2008, 11, to the present day, solar panels' efficiency and cost per square meter have improved dramatically. We now integrate solar energy into most of our projects. The solar hall at Paris Nord, a delicate exercise in a heritage setting. The Angoulême Station Passenger Hall, which is a renovation of a 19th century structure. And new build projects like Marseille Station Hall or the bioclimatic roof at Nice Airport Station, which will produce roughly 600 megawatt-hour per year. In the railway environment, many of the roofs, canopies, and structures are also prime candidates for solar panels. This is an avenue we systematically explore, as well as many other structures from the railway environment, such as platform shelters. So this was for the E. Now we jump to the M of resources and materials. In the early of this century, a new generation of stations embraced large-scale, long spans, and sometimes high-tech materials such as glass, steel, aluminum, and concrete, as can be seen in the extension of Madrid Atocha station. Alternatives now exist that minimize the use of energy-intensive, CO2-heavy materials, starting with what we have already there. Among Europe's 30,000 stations, very few are new. Most of our design work is about adapting existing infrastructure. Other options include using biosourced and geosourced materials with low carbon extractive footprints, such as timber. By combining precise programming with such materials, the station can move toward integral lightness. As with any construction project, the use of reclaimed materials is also a key to reducing the material footprint of station project. Gare du Nord again, and and this was pieces of the Centre Pompidou, you know, the museum which was designed by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers. For every project, we take care to quantify, measure, and weight both the visible and also the invisible material use, especially in the foundation. Carbon now. Carbon emissions associated with a station must be assessed for both its construction and for its subsequent operation. We integrate the global warming potential of each major design choice into our toolkit, and we know how to quantify the orders of magnitude for every station component, from the platform to the passenger building. To this emission of carbon stored, depending on material, are added those generated or avoided through the station role in the territory's mobility and intermodality network. Climate now. Today, as with the rest of the rail system, stations are subject to steadily rising temperature, and many recently built facilities, often designed in line with the transparency ideals of the modern architecture, now require adaptation to ensure adequate comfort for passengers and staff. It is essential to map vulnerabilities today and to integrate climate adaptation into station asset management plans. At Angoulême, the solar passenger hall casts shade over the platform. At Nice Airport, the timber solar canopy shelters a bioclimatic garden that helps regulate the station's thermal comfort while also welcoming biodiversity. Biodiversity now. Inheriting the mineralized character of 19th and 20th century industrial railway sites, stations are often mostly hard-paved environments. However, project by project, Biodiversity is becoming a place with station environments, as at Nice Airport, where the bioclimatic garden draws inspiration from the transformation of Madrid's Astoria station. The same ambition guided AREP's proposal for Budapest station. Forecourts are prime public spaces to be converted into tree-lined areas, enhancing comfort in warm weather and bringing the station back into the realm of a living environment. So at the end, the blueprint for the European station of tomorrow will, in my view, be the synthesis for the new priority I have outlined. Intensity of use in space, in time, in function, and via the EMC2P framework. Our matrix, our tools, our methods, our research, all the ingredients of our pursuit of the post-carbon station are shared openly, both in French and in English, on our website. We hope to build a coalition of owners, operators, and designers who share our post-carbon commitment, a commitment that will enable the station to fulfill the future promise of the train. So now this is the conclusion. And the conclusion, this is the United Station of Europe. Maybe a bit of water. So you will have understood by now, I love Europe. Its cities, its strengths, its station, and I suspect most of you too, and also John and Daniels in few minutes. I also love maps and the way they can inspire the new horizons, both distant and desirable. Think of an Europa. This is a map designed by Rem Koolhaas and his team, Omar Amo. It was in 2010, applying some kind of Le Corbusier style of functionalism to the question of energy at a continent scale. Think too of the huge enthusiasm generated by Starline, the continental metro, dreamed up by a collective of Danish designers. With an initial estimate price tag of 400 billion, it blithely ignores existing infrastructure, which will, of course, be the backbone of any real European rail future. Yet, it captures a powerful longing to travel from Rome to Amsterdam, from Brussels to Kiev, as simplified as from Paris to Marseille, and tomorrow from Prague to Brno. At AREP, we too have become map makers. We are delighted to present United Stations of Europe, our map of the 100 major stations in Europe, selected not only by the passenger volume they handle, but also by the international destination they serve and heritage value. This map reveals the extraordinary architectural richness of this station and the enormous potential they hold for decarbonized mobility, for services to their territories, and for inspiring a great continent to open itself up, harnessing the full power of the world's largest continuous railway network. If the station of tomorrow strives to be exemplary in facing ecological challenges, they can become the agoras of a post-carbon future meeting places, cultural hubs, catalysts for popular culture of ecological transition. That is what inspired this title, United Stations of Europe, a map, a dream, and a built reality. And just remember this thing, an increase of just 1% in the train's modal share of transport would mean at least 7 million tons of CO2 saved every year. It means new links forged also. It means people meeting. It means station bringing us together. That's it. Thank you for listening. And I wish you all a good onward journey on the rails and, of course, through the station of United Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raphael. I would like to ask you if you choose your seat, and we will be about to start the discussion. You won't be alone there. As I mentioned, we will discuss the railway system around Europe, because this was something like an excursus to the history and the state of the railway system that we have in Europe. And I also find out that there was a question on social media why we don't discuss the high-speed trains only with the companies that design them, like the companies that build them in Czech Republic, for example. But we would like to talk about the experience itself and about the things that we might do better in the future, and how the existing high-speed train system can evolve, and how can they influence the evolution of the cities around them. So today the topic is set, and we will discuss this topic with other two amazing guests. One of them is John Worth, the blogger, journalist, and independent activist, and author of the Cross Border Rail project. Welcome to camp, John. You are an English guy living in France, so you have amazing train experience. So, and if you're familiar with his blog, you can see that he traveled all around Europe by train. And you actually, I've seen the picture of the we call it motoráček, but it's it's 110, the train that we use on the local trains around the Czech Republic. It's my favorite. And when I saw that, I've seen like, okay, he saw everything. He's the guy. So you can ask him even about these trains and about even these localness of the trains around Czech Republic. And from Czech Republic is another guest, Daniel Kuiper, sustainable transport theorist, active user of Interrail system and In50 system of Czech Republic, and also a traveler. That's something that I add to his profile. Dan is our former colleague. When I started to work at camp, he was already there. And if you know our black tram with the sign Architectura, that's what we do together. It was my idea, but he made it happen. And thanks to him, we have this tram. So, wow to Dan. Thank you very much, gentlemen, that you decided to join our discussion. As I mentioned, you're really free to ask any questions. You can use our platform Slido, and we'll be really happy if you will discuss the topic with us. As I mentioned, today it will be about the experience. We have seen the beautiful presentation from the stations all around Europe and all around the world. We have seen that Europe really has the dense train system or rail system. And what I would like to ask first, and it's to you, Raphael, when you see that some city or some country is about to build the new system, new station or something like that, what's their expectation in the meaning of the change of the surrounding of the station itself? Because we have seen the Jihlava station, and if you follow the project of the VRT in Czech, the high-speed train system in Czech Republic, we see the futuristic stations somewhere somewhere behind the city, in the location that is untouched by human right now. We don't know much about the location, but we see that there is a visualization of something that will be in the future, something that is beautiful and it will change something. What's your experience from the cities that where something like that already happened? What was their expectation and what they see now is happening around the stations? What we can think about when we see this visualization, what will be the future?
I think we have some feedback from the way we have designed station like 20 years ago in France, and especially during the era and the paradigm in France about high-speed tracks and for the south one and the east one, for example. I think we have a feedback also about designing, trying to minimize the land use, which is a key issue. 20 years ago, in the debate and the public policy, people were not so much talking about the artificialization of soil and so on. So this is a huge concern. I mean, you may have in mind that the efficiency in terms of space use of trains is much more higher than the roads, and especially for high speed. I mean, it's like at least the third and even the tenth of if you look at the flow you can convey on the highways, and you do the same with the high speed track and also its station, its car park. It's much more efficient. That's not a reason not to look at, and that's what we were looking at G-Lava with our partners, is in order to make the more compact passenger building first, and also to think about the intermodality and the connection with the city. And it's a very important thing for sure in the past. This is what we call the brand new TGV station in France 20 years ago. We called them Gare Patate or Gare Beetroot, Beetroot Station, and this is something we have to take care today.
I'm asking this question because when we say future, when we think about future, when we see this sci-fi visualization of the cities of the future in hundreds and hundreds of years in the future, we see usually trains, high-speed rails, maglevs, and etc. And these things, we are used to think about them as the future of the transportation, even if it's 100 years old idea from 18th century, and maybe 18th century, I guess. Maybe 17, I don't know, 18. And is it really bringing a future to the locations, or is it like okay, it became a part of the countryside, part of the ordinary life of the people, became part of the villages and cities, or is it something that it really is activator, initiation of something that will move the cities forward to something? Because we see that there are parking lots for bikes, also very old technology, very traditional. Trains are very traditional. Is it really bringing a future, or is it something like that we finally find out that this is the technology we need? It's not a future, it's something that was already there, we just have to do it right?
I think it's very important to ask, who are you building for? I can speak of this experience. I live now in rural France. I've lived in Germany for 10 years before, and I'm British originally. If I look at the type of passengers that take the high-speed TGV from my nearest TGV station, Montbard in Burgundy, they are business people, mostly going to business meetings in Paris, and for that hour trip, it's 75 euros, give or take. If I take the regional train to Paris, which takes 2 hours instead and costs about 25 euros, they're young people, or they're old people who have time on their hands, or they are people who are too poor to take the high-speed train. You have, if you do that wrong, you create, to some extent, a two-class railway system. Right? Does Austria or Czechia today have a two-class railway system? I would argue it doesn't. Right? You have the rich business person taking a regional train, and you have the young student taking the Railjet high-speed train. Now, that then poses to me a fundamental question, and that's not an issue for the railway stations. This is a fundamental political question about high-speed rail. Who are we building for? Right? Now, when that high-speed station is built in Jihlava in the future, I hope that this 18-year-old student who doesn't own a car is still taking the high-speed train to go to Prague, as well as the business person who's going for a business meeting and the grandparents taking the grandchildren away for a weekend to visit the family. Right? Now, and that's a political choice. If you look at high-speed rail in Europe, I would argue that Germany and Austria, and to some extent Italy, have been a bit better at that kind of it's in the service of everyone in high-speed rail than to some extent that France or Spain have been. Yeah? And that poses a fundamental political question in Czechia, in Poland, which is building high-speed rail, and potentially for Rail Baltica, which should eventually connect up with Tallinn. So you need to ask the questions in that way.
There is actually a question from audience, and thank you for asking questions. I've seen many. What are the most important arguments that you would use to politicians and policymakers to make investment in rail infrastructure with a higher priority?
Maybe may I react, because as I'm an urban planner, I usually look at the railway as the part of the urban planning, which is important. I took one picture with me. Maybe you can show it now, if it's possible.
The one with the map?
Yeah, please,
yeah,
the map.
Yeah.
That's. I'm sorry, maybe you feel attacked at the moment, but don't worry, it will get better.
I'm cool.
When Správa železnic came to Czech Republic and to say that we will adopt the French model, I was shocked at the beginning. One of the reasons is that the French railway used to be also very dense as the Czech one, but not very efficient, of course. So when they came with the high-speed railways, then you can see what it made with the all-railway system. Of course, that's the price. And then we have to discuss the price. What does it make for the people? What does it make for the trains? And what does it make for the development of the regions? Because when you make the city closer by the high speed, that's one of the important price, maybe, because you can get faster to some new job opportunity. But also, what does it mean for the more local villages, or maybe for some more local centers? I took also this one, that's the Belfort-Montbéliard TGV, if I'm not mistaken, I think so.
Yes.
Down there you have the original station. It was not connected to the local railways. It was just like in the middle of the Champs. It was the Beetroot station. And last year, or maybe a few years ago, they connected the stations with the local railway. But the Swiss, they paid for a little bit, I must say, because they found it also efficient for their railway part. And now I would say the station is working better because it's more connected also to the local stations. I must say Správa železnic is now doing really a lot to improve the system because they put the exits on the high-speed railways, which means that also the local cities or the regional cities will get an access to this high-speed railway, which is very important, because if you have just train passing and not having an access, that's maybe the problem, and that may cause the inequalities we are talking about. And the inequalities are always the problem for the regions, and it makes always the cities bigger and more important. And I think that's the issue we must discuss, and that's maybe I'm coming a little bit to the Switzerland, which is a little bit our scale, but much richer. I think that we must have in mind that the trains must connect people and have the adequate scale to the country we live in, and that's maybe the reason we should really think about the high-speed railway as an opportunity for the regional development, and not only the connection from point A to point B.
Yeah, we'd like to add something to it, because it's a very interesting point. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, maybe I would like maybe to moderate the explanation of these two maps. I love maps, it can give the impression that high speed is responsible of that, right? And it's not the case, right? This is, I mean, the way of in 1930 in France, maybe 50% of the population was in the land were peasant or equivalent, and the population density was much more, it was smoother and much more widespread. So for sure, high speed may encourage the metropolization, but it's not responsible of that. And so I think that the conversion concern is obviously is how to increase the modal share of train transportation, and so you need to play on a different type of trains. First, to avoid maybe to have two classes and to have the popular ones and the exclusive one. That's a question. But also to have a sufficient offer for daily train on a tiny range or regional range of, let's say, 50 to 100 kilometers and long-haul ones. The main advantage of high speed in terms of even political will and democratic debate is it was really the case in France in the 80s, is to refresh the imaginary of the train. Say in the 70s and the 80s, in the early 80s, the train was a very old way of transportation. This was the way of transportation of the 19th century, not of the end of the 20th century, right? And with the TGV, with the high speed, it was something brand new. It was sexy, it was classy. So maybe from some points, France has, and maybe Spain also has pushed too much on the level of high speed, and maybe sometimes a bit forgotten about the train for the commuters at the regional scale. But you have to play with both, right?
You guys traveled around the whole Europe, so you have a lot of experience. Which country has the, I don't want to say, comparable density of the rail system, in the meaning that they maybe adopt the high-speed trains and they will keep the density of the local trains? Is there a country that has a comparable density, and are these arguments to keeping it strong enough to withstand the evolution of the high-speed trains in Czech Republic? We will be able to keep it?
My answer to that would be, in addition to Switzerland, which hasn't really built high-speed, I would say the example of what Austria did for building the high-speed line between Vienna and Linz, and is now extending that further onwards towards Salzburg, and is opening in December this year the Koralmbahn between Graz and Klagenfurt. That is an excellent model to aspire towards, I would say. It doesn't come particularly cheap, because what they're building, for example, is lots of interim stations on the high-speed lines, so as to mean actually you can run some regional trains that can go to the side, allowing the high-speed trains to overtake. So the cost per kilometer ends up being more than when building a French high-speed line, for example. But it's a great integrated model, and it's always, for me, a great joy when traveling by train in Austria, because you see everything is improving at the same time, right? You have regional trains which are improving, long-distance trains, night trains, the stations are being rebuilt, the digital ticketing offer is improving.
Intermodality?
Sorry?
Intermodality offer.
Exactly, right. And so I would say overall, Austria would be the example, which is also a scale of a country, which would give a model to which Czechia could aspire to. Don't beat yourselves up about this situation either. I would say that Czechia is the country in Europe that makes the very best of the infrastructure that it's got. Right? So there might be a line in the middle of nowhere that runs at 50 kilometers per hour, but there will be a train running there. There are some of these rural lines that still exist in France, which even now are in danger of being closed. So if you can take the best of that model and build towards a kind of a more of an Austrian style, that would be the suggestion that I would make.
Dan, what do you think about it?
I think the Austrian way is one of the best for our country, and Austria has much more complicated landscape than we do. So it means if we follow the main axis for the high speed, and then we have some connections to the regional trains, which has to be competitive. It doesn't mean that it runs the 15 kilometers per hour for one granny. That's also the problem. Then I think that's the plan how we can connect the republic or the city and the regions, because the scale of Czech Republic is like a very human scale. In 2 hours you can easily reach all the borders, I think. So that's also the concept, and then we must just very easily join the important cities behind the borders, which is also the issue because we still have very big issues on the border crossings.
I will ask you if you have any questions, so if you'd like to join the discussion, yes. I will ask my colleague to bring you a microphone.
To the tech team, can we put up the picture of Kraslice, by the way?
Thank you very much. Welcome to discussion.
This is one of my favorite pictures of a very Czech border circumstance. It's a tiny station on the border to Sachsen in Germany. It has a single carriage modern train which runs once per hour. Like, this is the kind of, you could not sum up Czechia's border railways more than...
Yeah, this is actually amazing experience that you have in Czech Republic. When I traveled to Děčín, to the north, and I've been traveling with the Siemens D0, you know, the very beautiful train, it can be met very often in Czech Republic, and on very old train, on very old tracks. And the second day when I'm coming back, it was the old Motoráček, as I mentioned, the 810, the oldest train we have on tracks right now. And that was very different experience. It was really nice, and I was very sentimental about it. But I had an idea for a question about the marketing of the traveling by train. But I will let you ask the question. So welcome to discussion.
Hi, I'm Luke, and I would like to say that I travel locally from one city to another, and there are multiple transfers on that line. And if I don't catch a train, then I may take the next one for free in our country at least. But I don't see that happening whenever traveling internationally. So my question to you is there a system, if implemented, that would solve this issue, for example, as is with the airways, I meant flights and so on? So thank you for answering.
So the point you raise is correct. So if you're traveling internationally and, for example, imagine you're traveling from Czechia through Germany and then into France, you start with České dráhy, you transfer onto a train of Deutsche Bahn, that gets delayed inevitably, and you end up missing your train in France. You can be stuck. Right, and you would be out of pocket if you needed a night in a hotel. You would not be covered by the railway companies. Now, the good news is will be 2 laws being proposed by the European Commission this autumn, or maybe it might stretch into the beginning of next year, to address the data sharing for ticketing and the passenger rights issue, so as to mean that passengers would not be stuck in that circumstance. So that's the good news. There will be a law which is forthcoming about that very topic. The bad news is the railway companies really hate it because they don't want to have to cope with passengers being stuck in a circumstance like that. So they are campaigning and lobbying very hard towards the European Commission to make sure that those laws will not be particularly passenger friendly. But that is a battle which is being played out in Brussels in the coming months. So contact your members of the European Parliament in particular to make sure that they actually come up with a law which is actually passenger friendly. Now, you should see, as a railway company, an opportunity. If you are safe as a passenger and you're not going to be left stranded, you would be more likely to take the train. More passengers should mean more income, and you create a positive cycle, meaning more international trains, more passengers, more income for the railway companies. But at the moment, some railway companies don't really see it that way. I think České dráhy does, to be fair, and I think ÖBB does, but there are some companies, more in Western Europe, it must be said, that don't really see that kind of optimistic cycle.
I think for Deutsche Bahn it might be bankruptcy problem because For the last 3 years, I never traveled with them on time, and I never reached my destination.
But I can somewhat disagree, because basically, Deutsche Bahn will always get you there one way or another. It might be hours.
Not the same day, maybe.
Right, but for example, the difficulty is if you're, for example, traveling on some of the high-speed lines in Spain, you have only 3 trains per day. Right? If you've missed that last one, which might go at 6 p.m., then you're really needing a hotel night, right? At least Deutsche Bahn will still run one at 10, which might still get you to your destination. So there are different problems in different places. But it's a really good point.
Yeah. Do you have another question? Anyone? Feel free to ask. Raise your hand, and we will pass you a microphone. Okay, I will ask. Yeah, definitely, and I have 100 in my head, so it's absolutely no problem to don't ask any questions. As I mentioned, you can have very different experience by traveling around the Czech Republic. I don't have many experiences from traveling around Europe, so I don't know how it looks like there. In the train, the state of the train, state of the vehicle that you're traveling in is part of the experience. I'm very surprised how many times someone tell me, I used a train last week and it was amazing. I didn't expect it was so nice, because it looks better than 747, you know. And people surprised how good trains are, how comfortable it is, how good experience it is. What is the best way to promote traveling by train? In the meaning that we need people to use local trains, we need people to be focused on high-speed trains during the elections, for example, because we would like to hear politicians to say this is important, what they should tell them, what they should show them. Arep is author of the design of the TGV. We've seen the interiors that are really beautiful. It's like from the movie from Paul Wes Anderson. It's extraordinary. What is the best way to promote traveling by train, to show it to ordinary people who are still don't know that it's the best thing in the world?
Maybe I say that for West company, I well know is to have like clean windows first. It's quite cool to see well the landscape.
And without scratches, of course. Yeah.
No, if I continue my dream, you know, maybe it exists somewhere in Europe, and maybe John knows one. But I'm dreaming of a podcast, you know, which could be connected where your situation on when you are on the track, and it could explain to you what you see by the window. And you could choose that if, for instance, I'm a urban planner, I will have some insights regarding urban planning of what I see from the village through my window. If I'm interested by biodiversity and plant recognition, and see, it could be marvelous also.
Like to me, for example, the best marketing for the train is when you have the highway and the high-speed railway, and the train goes faster than the cars. Then
Yeah,
always
exactly.
you look at the cars who are just slow, and you tell them just piss off. Yes, we are better. We are running faster, and we are eating some good food inside. I think that's the best marketing for the trains in general.
Yeah, but in the movie Taxi 3, there is the taxi that is faster than TGV. So there is a great question. You would like to continue? Yeah, because there is a question about the buildings that are, you know, surrounding the stations. Can you describe what functions and types of buildings are typical for TGV stations, especially the new ones built? Are these just simple stations with parking lot, or rather buildings with many floors that work as a real hubs with offices, shops, and services? Or, that I would like to add to it, are they prepared to be, you know, developing in the future?
Very good point. I continue my dreams, you know, and I look at a country where you have many contemporary, interesting railway stations. This is Netherlands, and in terms of architecture, it looks like quite massive, but in terms of programmatic, it's very, very interesting. This station which I'm thinking about, this is the Breda railway station, where you have like a mixed use. You know, this is not only a station, but you have also housing, you have co-working, you have also public equipment. And I think this is a very important thing. I was showing a map of Koulas, and Koulas deals a lot with, you know, with how to share the same space with different programmation. And I showed the example of the Budapest competition, and we wanted that in the hall, it could be also a place where you could have like concert, could be a concert hall. And still regarding this question of intensity of use, many railway stations are monofunctional and dedicated for passengers. Sometimes they have a good bar, good restaurant, good services, but we can dream also of something else.
But there's a really interesting point there is, and this is something also particularly to France, is how much time do you actually want to spend in a railway station, right? Now, I always find often, and that's not an architectural question, it's a timetable question. I spend a lot of time in French stations because I've got to wait a long time until my next connecting train comes. In Germany or in Switzerland, I spend no time in the stations because the connecting train is there. I've been to a Biel station dozens of times, and I've never even been in the hall, right? Because like the next train goes, right? I don't even need a place to sit because my time there is that short, right? Now, and when you in your presentation, it's like we need to design a station which is of the scale which is necessary for the number of passengers, which posed me the question: well, hang on a minute. Is this a number of passengers of a kind of a Swiss style where everyone will get out of there as fast as possible, or a French style where I might have to be waiting 45 minutes for my next train, right? So there's an important question there. Now, there is a case in France, which I think is interesting, but a bit tricky. It's the case of Valence TGV, right? Now, it's about 10 kilometers outside of the city, but it has a proper train connection, and a whole new quarter has developed around the TGV station. So it seems to have become a kind of a central point of a sort of almost new town. Now, I don't know the extent to which that was the intention in Valence TGV when they built that in the first place, but that one does at least seem to work. Some of the others have gone the wrong way, like Aix-en-Provence TGV. They've just seemed to expand the parking more and more. And there's another point regarding that about multimodality as well, is the assumption your high-speed train passenger drives a car or not? Right now, and there is still, even in the multimodal stations in France, too much of an assumption that most of your people, if they don't live in Paris, will own a car. Right? Now, at least plan with the assumption that they don't own a car. And I think there's a fundamental central point in that too.
Maybe, if I may add, to me, for example, Massy Palaiseau TGV is a very good thing, because when you invest in such an important architecture and in such an important station in general, I would say that then you put a cluster over there, and then you enhance some investments, some new projects for the economic development, maybe also some housing when it's possible. And I think that's the point. And when you really must build Praha-Jerný, which is really in the middle of the fields, but I believe Správa železnic knows why they build it over there, maybe it should be something more than a park lot. For example, to me, I don't have a car. Yeah, I don't have a car. And if I find myself in the middle of Praha-Jerný, I'm not sure what I'm going to do over there. And you must be sure that when you develop the high-speed railways, you don't develop the motorization at the same time.
Sure.
That must never happen. That's always a mistake.
But in the end, there's also a cost question, right? Because the closer you build to the city, the more bridges you need, the more tunnels you need, the tighter your curves have to be. Right, and then comes also then the marketing question. If you add an extra 10 minutes to your trip time in the total trip on the train, right? This thing that Marseille wanted to be within 3 hours of Paris, okay, it might take you a while, or actually in that city center to city center, right? But people tend to forget the additional time it would take them to get to the station in the first place.
That reminds me that the high-speed trains, and they are very often compared to traveling by plane. Airports are also far behind the city. You have to travel to take the airport. But the airport is a relatively closed area. If you don't have a ticket, you shouldn't be there. that's easy. But train stations are different. Train stations are open. You can go almost to the train. Even if you don't have a ticket, you can wave to someone without a ticket and you can go home. Should these high-speed trains and high-speed train stations keep the same vibe, in the meaning that they should be open, they shouldn't be behind the paywall, if I would like to mention
also,
that.
we have the other example. Spain's high-speed stations are not open because you've basically got a baggage control to get into them, and they are some of the most hostile, big modern stations. Zaragoza station, for example, is a huge cavernous place which feels cold and empty as a result. So that, in that regard, I agree with you completely. And we have the example of what happens when it's done wrong. So while there might be that nice garden in Madrid Atocha, the platform area is sterile and dead. Spain is a cautionary tale in that respect.
And maybe also Eurostar, it's not sexy for me when you have to be 1 hour and 30 minutes before there. What's the reason? You're in the city center, but anyway, you must wait there 90 minutes before. That's not the...
Yeah, but I didn't want to open this topic, but in the case of Spain, there is something like bad experience from terrorist attacks that were
But this is ridiculous in Spain, because it was regional trains which were attacked, and they do bag scans on the high-speed trains.
Yeah,
and if you arrive into Madrid from a regional station, they don't check you anyway, but they check you when you get on in order to leave. It's completely security theater.
Yeah,
it's
I understand that, and I have to say that I'm city planning insider, so I understand the thinking behind that. We were building something that is important, so it has to be safe, but the real issues will be untouched. But from the point of view of AREP, for example, designing the new stations, do you see that there is something like that the companies or countries that are building these stations, do you think, or do you see that they are more focused on safety? Do they want to be these stations more, less accessible from public, etc.? Do you see these trends, or it's not an issue? Like, I mean, if you see that they would like to apply the Spanish model, or if they want to keep these stations open to public.
No, this is not the case for TGV. There is something which is a bit annoying. It's like we call it, the
barriers,
the barriers and the doors, which are sometimes quite difficult for flow management. It happens even on, in France, we have the pathology to have tiny platforms. And some of them, like Bordeaux Saint-Jean, it could be sometimes quite difficult. You have this question of security and safety, much more for mass transit. And in France, 50% of the traffic it's in the Paris region, and this is mass transit. And in mass transit, this issue is growing, right?
Okay, I will ask you if you have any questions. Yeah, great. So I will ask Jiří, thank you. Welcome to discussion.
Hello, good evening, Aleš Vojtík. I will just continue to the previous questions about the terminals, because each terminal of a high-speed train is actually a huge investment in bringing the train there, because what is expensive is actually the railway itself. Yeah? And I'm just wondering about the new terminals which were being built in France or other places. If the local municipalities or the government was thinking about building, for instance, like new hospitals or things that actually would not just bring the people from A to B, but kind of like create the things that needs to be done anyway. But there is like a good location where to concentrate and basically make it more accessible for people that would otherwise be going into some location with a more difficult connection. So I was looking at it, I didn't actually, see that happening. So I'm just wondering if it's really, too much visionary, or it's just, that there was a line, terminal, and, kind of things happen later on.
Now
Thank you.
Sorry, but my answer will be pessimistic. The good synthesis at a region scale does not happen very often. right?
I would say it's maybe worth looking at the whole plan of the Koralmbahn in Austria for that, at least as a driver of regional economic development. It's a very long-term project and an expensive one, but if anyone has got a clear and consistent plan on those topics, I would assume that they would be the ones that would come closest. Bear in mind that having a high-speed line for some politicians is a prestige project to cut the ribbon and show that you have it. And in reverse, if you then were to lose it, right, there are some smaller towns which are connected to the TGV network in France, which are fearful they will lose their 2 or 3 trains a day to Paris, and the mayors are, we shall never lose the train to Paris, without asking themselves the question, who is that actually serving? So I agree we should be thinking about that, but it's, there's also the issue relating is also the Rail Baltica line from Poland to Tallinn. The different countries are asking themselves that question differently, and that's causing problems in the project planning. So the Estonians are much more keen on some of those local connections than the Latvians are, for example. So you have to make sure that all of the players in a project all want the same thing in that respect.
That's why I was so pessimistic to the terminals, because usually they become ghosts for most of the time when there are not enough trains. That's why usually it must be accompanied with some like investment encouragement to some private assets and so on. But it depends if it can work everywhere. So that's why I was only thinking about Massipalezo. I don't have another in mind. And yeah, to be honest, that's why I love the Austrian model, because they don't really build the terminals and they have the exits, and they usually come to the original train station in the city center, and then they just took another exit and they get to this high-speed railway again. It means that you still keep the old stations in the city center and you have the exits. It's true that you can lose 5-6 minutes, maybe something like this, but in the scale of Austria, I think it's still great, because you're getting very fast to the other cities and you keep the city center just on your hand.
In talking about the scale, there's a question, in the context of Czech Republic, is it worth to plan a build high-speed rail rated to speed of 320 kilometers per hour with few terminals compared to more cost-effective rating of 230 to 250 kilometers per hour with more stations like in Austria? That's a question. And I also would like to add, should we think about the high-speed rail system in Czech Republic that we are just a part of the huge system, and do we have a potential to be traveled around from another country to another one? Like we will be just a part of the journey of someone, and we will be the someone.
I would say, bearing in mind that there is also a very important cost factor to that. The moment you go above 300 kilometers per hour, your costs skyrocket. Because your curves have to be so gentle, it makes land acquisitions and tunneling and bridging very expensive. The UK has just found that to its cost with the construction of its high-speed line, which is designed for 350 kilometers per hour, meaning the land acquisition costs were off the scale. So there's an important point there. For Czechia's scale, 230 to 250 is probably, in my view, is perfectly sufficient. You have to ask yourself the question is, what are the corridors that would be valuable, of which Czechia is a part? So at least Berlin, Prague, Vienna, for example. Ultimately, there is the potential, looking in the medium term, to have a solid corridor there, and Prague to Poland. And eventually, if the Germans can get their act together, or the Bavarians, Prague towards Munich. So maybe in some of the circumstances, if it is possible to without massive additional cost, to build for 300, perhaps. But it would strike me that based on the experience of other projects, that case for Czechia's scale would be economically perhaps somewhat questionable.
I think really we shouldn't take this path, because it would be devastating for the other railways, I would say. And when we just improve some of the local railways to speed of 140, 160, that's already great. I think what Správa železnic made to České Budějovice, that actually now you can go 200 on some of the parts, that's great stuff. I think that's the way we can take, especially for some corridors that are not in the view of the high speed. So I think that's the way we should take, because otherwise we don't have enough money to do that.
Yeah, and we have only 10 pendolinos or something like that. So it's not very good stuff.
7 actually.
Yeah,
one is broken.
Yeah, one is broken. Yeah, okay. I've seen it last month. It's still broken. There is a question regarding to accessibility. Surroundings of the train stations in many cities seems to be not very safe, and it's part of the evergreen in Czech Republic and in Prague. We've been on the building side of the new terminal Smíchov, Prague. It's a big project and it's actually happening right now. And they already told us that it is designed to be able to withstand the people around it, graffiti and everything. And do you consider this to be a serious problem for competitiveness of rail transport? Is it something that it's the same problem all around Europe, or is it something that is a problem on the eastern part of Europe and middle part of Europe? What do you think about it?
It's a problem everywhere. I once walked out of Frankfurt on
Why is
main
that?
station,
Why is that?
and there was an assault straight in front of me when I walked out of the station. This is a general problem. I'll leave the others to answer or what to do about it.
So is it like for the street planners?
It's a general urban problem because the stations just attract those people, and that's also a responsibility of us like urban designers. When we put too many parks and too many useless square around the train stations, then usually you have those people, because you have blank spaces that nobody really want to stop behind, because when you go to the train, you don't go there 1 hour before just to have a nice time in the park in front of the train station. Who does this?
Yeah.
I don't know those people.
Yeah.
You don't need a park in front of a train station. You need just like a very fast path to the train station and to take your train. And there are still some politicians who think that the new train stations in Prague must have big parks and big squares. What for? I ask you, what for, really? Look at the Berlin Hauptbahnhof. You have one blank space in front. That's one of the most horrible places you can live in Berlin. And even Deutsche Bahn says that they don't know what to do with, because it's not their space, it's the space of Berlin. And they are discussing how to refurbish it. And that's, I think, what we all know as urban planners already discovered many years ago, that at the train stations and at the metro stations, you have the biggest density you can get.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing how you can manage it. I think that in Lyon, that's what they did at Lyon-Part-Dieu. There was also some kind of park, and they put some buildings or something, and now it's better. But that's the point, I think.
What do you think from a point of view designer?
Just facts. I know quite well the 3,000 station in France, and looking at statistics, you have during a full year. Roughly 3 to 4 billion of people crossing the train station, and the quantity of events is very tiny compared with this flow. So I think that the issue is much more about real security and about some danger when you are on the platform, or for the older cities, the older station, when you have to cross the tracks without sufficient safety process. That's a topic for railway operators. But I think the same that Daniel. I mean, you have the same on the public spaces, on some public spaces, on some corners, and when you move around in big cities, you know that you have some places where you have the feeling that that something could happen also. So.
When we are talking about the night stations, there is a question. Do you see potential for developing overnight trains connections more widely in Europe, and what factors would determine their success? Because we can see this time period that there are new overnight trains, for example, to Copenhagen. That's the new one from Prague to Copenhagen. I think very popular city to travel from Prague right now, so why not? Do you see their potential for development of these connections? And do you like them?
I travel by night train a lot and have taken, I think, at least 5 night trains already this year, and I've got a lot more to come. And at least throughout the summer months, Europe-wide, the demand is much higher than the supply. You try and travel anywhere in Central Europe by night train in the summer months, and you've got to be quick getting your ticket because it's going to be sold out. The problem comes is, how do you up the supply? And the problem is, simply put, is most railway companies are not very interested in night trains because they are hard to operate, they are international almost by definition, and running shorter, high-speed daytime trains is more profitable. So I can understand why SNCF, Deutsche Bahn, Renfe, Spain has no night trains at all. At least France has some which are subsidized by the government still. Czechia is better provided for than the European average. So how do you solve this? Now, there is a private company that some of the Arab team even took to get here, European Sleeper, a private company that runs Brussels, Amsterdam, Berlin, Prague. But the problem is the carriages on that night train are awful because basically they were saved from the scrap heap, yeah? Almost literally. Now, and so what you need to do to put this right is you need to build new night train carriages. And the railway companies don't want to do it, so you need a political answer. So one of the things which I've been looking at and trying to persuade European Union institutions to look at is, could you create some kind of pool of night train carriages that some other operators could lease from at a reasonable price? Now, the difficulty is you've got to break new ground politically in order to manage to do that. So there is potential for night trains, and there is no contradiction between night trains and high-speed rail, because, for example, in Romania or Bulgaria or Hungary, we are not going to get high-speed trains anytime soon, and if you want to do really long distances by train, doing it overnight is efficient. The case is obvious. The politics and the economics of how to get there is much more complicated.
Just maybe to say that the Austrian railways, they are investing a lot in the night trains.
And they've just scaled down their order, and they're ordering only 24 new trains, right?
But it's still
better than nothing.
I would say in the European scale, it's really great because they are trying to operate the new night trains in Germany and Italy and so on. They introduced the POTS, which is a very interesting concept. I think the night trains, there are 2 things that are important. It's the safety and the comfort. Otherwise, when you don't feel safe, that you don't have the impression that someone can come or steal something, it never works. And then, of course, when you just sit on a shitty seat, like in the European Sleeper, and it's all filthy and disgusting, you don't want to take it anymore. So that's, for example, the Czech railways, they have a great service of the night trains. And then I think why some of the night trains are really a success, that's because some of the connections doesn't exist as plain connections. And I would say, for example, the northern countries, they have the best night trains I have ever traveled with. For example, Swedish night trains are absolutely the best, but that's historical because it's very hard to get to Kiruna or wherever in some winter times. So then you take an excellent night train and you love it.
And why is it that we have them in Czech Republic, for example? Because you mentioned that it's not that profitable, it's very hard to operate. Is it because we already had the coaches and we just renovated them, or it's like a good tradition or good marketing, or it's
I would say it's thanks to ELVE. Yeah, ELVE is a very strong partner for Czech Railways. I think they are doing a great job in general.
But Czechs generally, right, have good working relationships with all of the neighboring railways, generally put, right? So that means actually you want to organize a night train or even a daytime train to Poland, you've got good relationships with the company on the other side of the border, which allows that to be done, right? There are other parts of Europe where even state-owned railways are barely on talking terms with each other across a border, and Czechia doesn't have that problem pretty much anywhere at any of its borders, right? And that's good, right? That collaborative relationship that Czechia has at all of its borders helps when trying to do international travel.
Maybe it's also because of the position, because all the trains must go through. Yeah.
There is another tiny breaks for encouraging the night trains. This is the maintenance of the tracks. And generally, the operator, they do it at night. And sometimes you have some kind of conflict. Anyway, I still think that this is a beautiful topic of design. I dream that one day maybe in AREP we have to design a night train, you know, because I think that everything has not been done in terms of desirability, in terms of reinventing the way of dreaming and traveling by night. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and I guess that there is also a collision of cargo and freight trains with because
true.
they are operated during the nights very usually. And is it something like that? Because there is one question that is focused on freight capacity. Could building new high-speed lines free capacity for freight on existing tracks? Is it possible, or is it like the way we think about them?
That's been a helpful thing in Germany because you've managed to put more of the passenger trains onto the high-speed line, freeing up more capacity for freight on the traditional line. So if you do that correctly, there's possibility for that.
Yeah, because I usually ask this question when we talk about the development of the tracks around the Prague, the hub of the Prague, and these traditional trains, traditional tracks are usually very close to the residential areas, and people don't want freight trains there. That's the one thing. And the second thing is that we usually lost the infrastructure that was used to operate the cargo on the trains. So in Prague, for example, we only have one station that is capable to operate the cargo trains. So is it like Is there any country in Europe when they think about this that they will put cargo back to the trains? Because in Czech Republic, for example, even if we are in the middle of the Europe, we see that we usually use trucks to spread cargo around.
I think there are a couple of cases. I'm not a specialist on freight, but generally, Switzerland is a good case. And there are some interesting examples in the Nordic countries as well. So, for example, supermarkets using containerized refrigerated freight trains. Also, the Danes are very good at putting truck half bodies onto trains with good multimodal terminals. So I think there are some examples there. Just one word of caution, the German experience of trying to build high-speed passenger train lines for daytime operation to run freight on them in the night, right, has not proven to be a great success. Because what you then have to do is build the tracks with very low inclines. That means lots of tunnels, which drives up your cost, right? So that case of the line through the middle of Germany where they designed a kind of mixed-use, high-speed daytime trains, passenger, night freight, that looked like a very messy combination, ultimately, with the light of the historic experience.
Yeah, and I guess that the freight trains has different dimensions, or the tracks have to be different dimensions in the meaning of the, they're really heavy.
You just build to basically no except French and Spanish high-speed lines. It's too complicated to answer more.
Okay, I will ask you if you have any other question. Would you like to ask anything? We have some questions there on Slido, of course, so we can continue, but if you would like to ask something, feel free. There is a nice question or mention that my dream vacation is as far as possible in Europe. We will see a fast track to speed up rail to the pole, for example. Is it something like it will be possible to go to the pole, to the north, by a high-speed train? Is it, we have seen the map, is it something that we will travel to the North Pole by train?
I crossed the Arctic Circle this year by train. I went to Narvik in northern Norway. And there really are not many people that are living there. So that's one for night trains rather than high-speed trains, I would say.
This is the place where you don't want to miss your train.
Yeah. I expected that it would be really a quick answer. But what about the traveling to the Mediterranean Sea? I know that in France, it's really popular that at the beginning of the summer, everyone take a TGV and go to the Nice or somewhere, Saint-Tropez or whatever. And it's something like a stereotype almost. That, people from Paris take a train and go somewhere to south. What about the vacationing by train? We have seen that there are, you told that there are limited capacities, in the meaning that during the summer people want to travel by train. Is it something that has a potential even for countries they don't still, for example, Croatia, it's mainstream to travel by car to Croatia, and we see that there are actually some train services that offers to travel to Croatia by train. It's not a high-speed train, but there is the service. Do you think that there is a potential to develop the train services to the south, focused on vacationing during the summer?
That's one of the purpose of this map. If you look carefully, there is a timetable on the, and you can see the continent and the time to link for one-to-one. And as soon as you understand that you can go from Paris to Bucharest and it will take to you something like 24 hours, you say, okay, let's go and do it. So I've done it like not this summer, but the last one. And it's really feasible. So it didn't exist, so I went on the MAD 61, and so I was doing the map by myself. But I think that as soon as you understand that it's feasible and it's not like an impossible journey, it can encourage the discovery of Europe.
Okay, so maybe the last question: what is the best travel you can do from Prague somewhere around Europe? What we would like to say that we should try. We should definitely try a train, take it and go somewhere from Prague. What's your personal best? I will start with Dan because I know that he has many experiences and I follow his Instagram. So if you are interested, follow him because he started.
I think go to the Nordics. That's extremely great experience. Thanks to the Danish bridge, you can go by train to Narvik. That's the northest place you can go, and I really recommend it because if you don't wanna see many people over there, because just it's in the middle of the countryside where you can see just elks and reindeers, that's maybe the journey you can take. And as I say, I love Swedish railways. They have really great service, and I'm very much recommending taking those trains because that's really a great experience when you are in the middle of the summer by the sea in Denmark, and the other morning you are in the middle of the tundra with another weather and another countryside.
Okay, John.
So there's a point of disagreement on the panel because Sweden is one of my least liked countries to travel by train. Maybe I'm just have bad luck, but everything breaks down when I go to Sweden. It's been the most problematic. The best night trains are in Finland, by the way, not in Sweden. From Czechia, Czechia's got amazing railways towards its borders. So I'll just cite two. One I'm going to tomorrow and the other one I'm going to on Thursday. If you take the line called the Śląski Semmering, which goes to Jesenik, it's an amazing forest line which eventually takes you into Poland to the town Glukowarzy, which has one of the scariest railway stations you will ever encounter. Not because it's in a bad condition, but because there are no passengers there. And so you're in something which looks like it's out of a horror movie or somehow there's been a zombie apocalypse. Anyway, it's an amazing and really very weird place to get to on the Polish side of the border. But in Czechia, just like everything in Czechia, it's very well maintained and very good. And the other one I'm going to on Thursday, which is another international route from Czechia, which is great, is to go to Bayerische Eisenstein. So this is an amazing, massive railway station where the border of Germany-Czechia goes through the middle of the building. And you can tell where the building border is because the roof is a slightly different color on the German side and the Czech side. And so if you've never been to that one, I can highly recommend that one as well. So those are two really nice lines of the Czech part, which are reachable within a day from Prague.
Raphael, what's your personal best?
Well, it's going to be easy because I just know one. Because the one I've taken 30 years ago, I think my memory is off. No, it's like Prague to Brussels. And when we arrived this morning, there was the corridor between Dresden and Prague, which is really beautiful, and the banks of the Elbe River. So.
Okay. The last question that was there on Slido is if we have these beautiful brochures here in camp, we have them. So you will find them on the info point in front of the cafe. So if you would like to have one, you can find them there. And I will ask you for clap your hands to our amazing guests. That's well-deserved applause for you guys. Thank you very much for that amazing discussions, and I can see your enthusiasm, so I definitely would like to spend more hours with you talking about trains. It was amazing. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for spending time with us here in camp, and I hope we will see you here very soon for another discussion or event. So thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.